to have you guys, the diehards who came out no matter what. And it's good to have all of you online too. I don't know if I should look at the choir because we have almost as many people in the choir as we do out in the congregation, or just to look at the camera because we have more people on camera. Either way, I'll try to look at all of you at some point. I'm going to start by sharing a little story of my days before I became a Christian, if that's all right. Anyone go to Mohegan Sun? Okay. Now, I'm not saying you if you're a Christian, you can't go, but I gambled when I wasn't a Christian, and my game of choice was blackjack. I love blackjack, and I didn't gamble a lot, but and I kind of studied the game. I trusted the rules of the game. So if the dealer has a 6 showing, the most they can have is 16, and the dealer has to hit on 16, and there's a good chance that the dealer will bust. So I was dealt a 4 and a 6, or no, a 4 and a 9, and I stayed, right? And the dealer flipped over his card, 16, got a jack, so he has 16, and then took a card, and it was a 5. I trusted the rules of the game to not fail me, and they did. That's the name of the game sometimes, right? The whole lesson from Jeremiah, the prophet, is all about trust, and having misplaced trust and having trust in the right place, and the difference in how they contrast and so forth. Oftentimes we misplace our trust, and that's because we put our trust in ourselves more often than not. More often we try to say, well, I will do it. We have this saying, right? If you want something done right, you do it yourself, right? And that's what we imagine life to be in our culture, is if you want it done right and done it well and done it right the first time, you might as well just do it yourself. Trust and rely only on your strength. Don't really be dependent on other people, right? Human strength will get us through. And I've had a lot of conversations with people who've been diagnosed with cancer who have said at one point or another, well, I am built for this. Meaning that they're going to rely on their own strength to get through that cancer treatment and so forth. Jeremiah says that's misplaced trust. And he gives this very vivid image of what happens when you have misplaced trust. You'll be like a bush that is out in the wilderness, in the desert, where it cannot find water. It does not have the resources to thrive. And so what happens to any plant life when it's not given enough nutrients? It dies, right? It dies. Usually by Tuesday, I come over to church, and I have to look at all the plants that we have in church. We don't have many, but we do have a few. And it's usually I forget to water them on the weekend, so they're all kind of doing this because they didn't have enough nutrients. They didn't have enough sunlight. They didn't have enough whatever it may be. That's how we are when we put our trust in ourselves. And we often think about this and say, well, gee, I can only rely on myself because every single person has hurt me. Every single institution has failed me. And we might even point a finger at the church, right? And say, well, the church hasn't been there for me. Therefore, I can't even rely on it. If you want to do it right the first time, do it yourself. Misplaced trust in ourselves is where we tend to get it wrong most of the time. And why is that? Well, misplaced trust in ourselves gets us to live life in a particular way. And just this past Wednesday, we were talking about this. Kathy, you might remember, right? about what is the biggest issue with the world today, and in my humble opinion, I said, well, the biggest problem in the world today is that people live for themselves. They don't live for anyone else. They live for themselves and only themselves. Maybe a couple other people that are really close to them, but for the most part, we live for ourselves. Anytime someone asks us to do something and we don't really want to do it, we get a little annoyed, right? We get a little grumpy. We do it because we love that person or whatnot, but we get a little annoyed, right? It's not really what I wanted to do today, and so forth. That's an indication of living for yourself because you feel like you've been wronged in that request, right? When we put our trust in ourselves, in our own strength, we live only for ourselves. But that is not how we were created to be. We were created to be and to live for everyone else. That's how we're designed. That's how we're built, is to live for every other person. And the only way to do that is if we trust in the right source, the thing that gives us life. And I'm going to say it, but we all know it because you've come here and you probably have heard me preach a few times. What's the right answer? Jesus is the right answer, right? God is the right. That is our source. That is the source of all life. That's where our trust should be. And Jeremiah paints a completely different image of the person who puts their trust in God. And he does it in three ways. And this is what I wanted to read because this is what I want to focus on, right? It shall not, it's talking about the tree planted by the water. Here is the person that has put their trust in God. You will be like a tree planted by water, sending out roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes. Its leaves shall stay green. And the last one is a little farther down, right? At the very end. And it does not cease to bear fruit. Three things that Jeremiah says of a person who puts their trust in God. First, that person will not fear hardship, will not fear drought, will not fear uncertainty. Because life will give that to us, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir a lot when I say that, but we all have experienced hardships in our life. We know that life is hard. But someone who puts their trust in God does not fear it. They have the strength to endure and persevere through those hardships. That's the first thing. But the other two are probably even more important. First, the leaves will always be green. Through hardships, through difficulty, through challenges, oftentimes we get into a place where we feel like we are just trying to get through. If I could just survive this, right? And we kind of stay stagnant in our movement forward and progressing with anything. We kind of just hunker down and endure the hardships. A good example is just this morning with the weather, right? It's better to just stay in place and let the weather get by, and then once the weather's over, then we'll venture out, right? But that's surviving. That's not living. That's surviving. But when Jeremiah says the leaves are green, what he's saying is the person who trusts in God will be living through those hardships. You won't simply just be surviving, you'll be living. There's life within those hardships, within those difficulties, within those challenges. We don't have to be afraid of them, but we also don't have to hunker down thinking that, oh my gosh, I might be overcome by this obstacle. We can live in them. And not only can we live in them, but their branches will bear fruit. That's a very subtle thing that Jeremiah says, but it's very poignant too, because what happens when a tree bears fruit? It's not just surviving and it's not just living, it's thriving. It's thriving. It's able to grow and produce fruit. Jeremiah says those who put their trust in God will not only be surviving, not only be living, but they'll thrive through these challenges. Now, oftentimes when we look back, hindsight's always 20/20, right? We don't see that fruit in the moment. We don't see that life in the moment. But when we look back, we begin to see the fruit in it. We begin to see how our difficulty and our challenges, our obstacles, and how we lived through them have actually bared fruit. Maybe not just for us, but for the world. Right? Early on, the church grew in very exponential ways when it first came to be founded. Right? The apostles went out and they shared the good news, and people were actually coming to faith, and record numbers, thousands of people at one time would believe in Jesus. And it wasn't necessarily because Peter was a great preacher. It wasn't because Paul was a great student and teacher. It wasn't because Thomas was someone who listened well. It wasn't any of that. It was the fact that a lot of those early believers died for their faith. They went through extreme hardship in their coming to faith and living their faith, to the point where the world actually tried to snuff them out. And it was in that where the fruit was bared for the rest of the world to take a witness of that strong faith in a God who even is in the hardships with us. You probably have heard this one time or another in the church. The church is built on the blood of the martyrs. That is a real statement, because someone has gone through a hardship, gave their life, and because of that, they bared fruit for others to come and have faith and believe in God. Jeremiah paints this image of misplaced trust in ourselves, which we do far too often. I raise my hand to that because I put myself in this camp, right? Far too often we put our trust in ourselves, in our own strength, and only when we do we understand our limitations. Because oftentimes we become disappointed at the end result of whatever we thought we can do ourselves better. And then Jeremiah says, but look at the person who puts their trust in God. They won't just survive. They won't just live. They will thrive through these challenges. They'll thrive through these obstacles. I've always shared with, Nicole and I have always shared with the boys that no matter where life takes you, it might not be the easiest place to live. It might not be the easiest job to work at. It might not be the easiest whatever, right? But you can be planted in it, and you can grow through it. And you can become a better person because of it. Always be planted where you are. Send out those roots to find the nourishment and water that God provides no matter where you are in life. That way you can thrive through them, not just survive. Oftentimes I look out in the world and I counsel people and I think, gosh, we're just surviving life. We're just surviving life. But God wants the abundant life for us, right? I have come to give life and life abundantly. But that means we have to trust in God and put our trust in God and rely that God is going to give us everything we need no matter what we're facing. And not to forget to look back at our life and reflect and say, where was the fruit in those seasons? Right? Where was God in that place with me? Where was the growth in me during those times? We have to reflect upon that. That way we see the evidence and can trust God even more that He'll be with us in the future. Aristotle said this, not a Christian, but I loved Aristotle when he said this. He said, a life not reflected upon is not a life worth living. Let me say it again. A life that is not reflected upon is not a life worth living. And I think what he means by that is if we don't take stock in our life at times, we will be like tossed and thrown about with the wind or with the waves or whatever, and we won't know where we're going to end up in life because we are dependent completely on circumstances of our life. But if we take stock in our life, we can then start making choices and decisions based on our trust in God to live differently in the world. So we always have to look back and see how God has worked in the midst of us in those difficult times as we trust God more and more so we can obtain that abundant life in Him. Let us pray. Lord, with everything going on in the world, both from a national and worldly perspective, to our towns and to our cities, and then also in our own personal life, there are so many things that can overwhelm us, that can make us afraid and want to just hunker down and survive these challenges. There's so many things going on in the world where we feel like we have to rely on our own strength. Only by our hands will anything good come of this place. But that's misplaced trust, Lord. And we can all testify to that through our own experiences. So we ask you, Lord, now to help us put our trust in you. Not just in the big things, but also in the little things, the everyday things of life. Help us to put trust in you to navigate the daily routines of life. Because honestly, Lord, I think I speak for all of us when I say, at the heart of it, we want to thrive. We want to grow. We want that joyful, abundant life. We want to experience the fullness of life. But to do that, we have to trust in the source of life, which is you. So teach us to put our roots in you. Teach us to build our foundation in you. And we ask all of this in your Son's glorious name. Amen.